I'm just very pleased to welcome you here to this 1 hour conversation with Patti Robinson and Kirk Strosahl. And they're going to be talking about FACT, the next approach that they developed after ACT, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But let me start off with some of the logistics of our little time together today. So first, the format will be for about the first half hour or so, I'll be talking to Patti and Kirk about their approaches, and so you kind of get to know them. The assumption is some of you know very well the work that they do and are probably ACT practitioners, and other of you might not know much about it and always wanted to learn what's this ACT all about. You've heard it's an effective approach. So the first half hour, we'll have these questions. Now, the second half hour or so is meant for you to ask questions, to be involved, and be part of this program today. And there's a couple of ways that you can ask questions. Number one, you can put in the chat box, and on your screen you might see Emily Porter, who is kind of the host for this whole session. She'll be keeping an eye on the chat line, the chat box, and in the chat box you can say, here's a question, and Emily will ask it, or you could say, I want to go on the screen, and Emily will call you to the screen. And the other way, now some of you or most of you are Zoom, very acquainted with Zoom, is use the hand raising function or the hand waving function. And that's another way during the latter part, you can be brought to the screen and just involve the conversation directly. There's also the closed caption function that you probably know about. So if you want to see the words as well as hear them, please feel free to do that. Now, by tomorrow sometime, for all of you, whether you're here in the room or not, we're going to be sending a copy of this video to you. If you've missed something, you want to see it again or watch it for the first time, there it is. And we'll also send you information about a webinar program Patti and Kirk will be leading for us at Leading Edge Seminars come October. So we'll let you know about that. If you want to learn more, that's one way that you can do it. So I'm really quite excited to present to you Patti Robinson and Kirk Strosahl. So first, you probably know, and if you don't, Patti is the Director of Training and Program Evaluation for Mountain View Consulting Group in Oregon. They're both in Oregon. And probably most of you know Patti because she is a co-developer of Focused Attack Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, as well as Primary Care Behavioral Health, that model. She's written over 50 publications, lots of books. She's been out there for a long time advancing the world of psychotherapy. And Kirk, you probably know, is a pioneer and co-founder of acceptance and commitment therapy. He's written lots of books, including a new one on acceptance and commitment therapy for crisis intervention, which we probably won't have a chance to get into, but sounds very, very interesting. They both live in Oregon. They're a couple. And wherever you are, I'm thrilled and very happy to present Kirk and Patti. I'd like to say a few things about FACT because I'm pretty excited about it. I've been around the therapy world for a while, seen different approaches come in, but this addresses some issues that I haven't heard talked about a lot in our 1,000 webinars over the last 30 some odd years. And that's kind of what I think Kirk has called the horse race between the client's therapy, the tolerance to be in therapy, and the amount of change that therapists can introduce in their lives that would motivate them to continue to be in therapy. It really focuses what's on top, and it acknowledges that a lot of clients drop out of therapy after a few sessions. So how can you make most use of those sessions, not assuming they're here for the long term or the medium term, but it also can be used for medium long-term therapy. And I think, as they say, it's a therapy that takes half the time with better results. So I think this is an approach that you'll be interested in if you're a therapist, because it's something that you can use, something you can adapt for your practice, and will be useful to you. So Patti and Kirk, I'd like to hear about how you developed FACT after ACT. Maybe start off with talking about how ACT came into your lives as something you developed, to the move towards FACT, the latest stage.
Well, I would say it started in the mid-'80s, and we just got lucky. We were both putting our toes in the water in primary care as as researchers and clinicians, and seeing, from our first experiments that, wow, we can reach a lot of people in a way that's very engaging. And people will come back. About the same time we met Steve Hayes. We just needed continuing education credits, like maybe some of you that are on the call today. And so we went to the University of Washington and we met Steve Hayes. He was talking about comprehensive distancing. And we're like, yes, that makes complete sense. We were well trained in cognitive behavioral therapy. And so we're like, yes, this opens the door. So we became colleagues and good friends with Steve. And week before last, I had dinner with him in Buenos Aires at the ACT WorldCon. So he's still kicking and up to lots of new and interesting things. And it's been an honor and a pleasure to work with him and with Kirk over the decades. And I guess I would say, because Kirk and I were already in primary care at the time of comprehensive distancing, and we started using those techniques, certainly in the 90s, that's when FACT began. And it was born in the context of primary care and in parallel, really, with acceptance and commitment therapy. So it fits the context of primary care, while ACT fits the context, I think, that we see in academia, where Steve was working, where we're training therapists, and also has the assumptions, traditional assumptions of therapy to some extent. So FACT is really unique in some ways, although has a great deal in common with ACT. So Kirk, please add to that.
That's a pretty hard act to follow. Yeah, what's the old saying? Necessity is the mother of invention. If you're a traditionally trained mental health clinician and you go into a primary care environment or a general practice environment, the first thing that happens is none of this is really going to work. I mean, my basic skills are going to work, but they're going to have to be retooled considerably. Just to give you an example, over 25 years of working in primary care, the average number of visits I had with patients was a little over 2. That's about half of what you see in the databases on psychotherapy utilization. So in that kind of environment where you're only seeing people maybe twice or 3 times, and you're seeing lots and lots of people with all kinds of different problems, you have to learn to come up with an approach that works for everybody, that makes sense as a general way of understanding human suffering, and then an approach that gives you some tools that you can use to help pretty much anybody in any kind of life situation. So yeah, in primary care, there's lots of people with mental health issues, but there's people with medical issues, there's people in violent relationships, there are people that are living in unsafe housing, people with terminal illness. And I think the thing that stands out as I look back on my career is it was the exposure to just unrestricted, unscreened suffering that you see in general medicine that kind of helped make sense to me of the psychological flexibility model, the model that we use in FACT, which is sort of helping people be open, promoting present moment awareness, getting them in touch with their values and what they want their lives to be about and who and what they care about, and kind of pointing their behavior in that direction. And if you think about that as a general principle of therapy and not a treatment for a specific kind of disorder, but this is an approach that would work generically for anybody with any kind of problem. So if that's the short, I don't know how many patients I saw in primary care in those years, probably 10,000. Something in that vicinity, some kind of a staggering number.
Okay, so maybe we could, what are the key principles of fact? You know, if someone knew nothing about ACT and nothing about fact, what would you say is the essence of those principles? And then how they appear in that first session, which is so important, because you're saying you can spend so much time in assessment that you don't get to the intervention part. So what are the key principles and how does it show up?
I think you can think about this as there's sort of structural features of fact, and then there's sort of the functional features, right?
Mhm.
So the functional features are more like, what are we going to do to help somebody become more equipped in their life? The structural is, so how do we change the way the session operates to accomplish that? And I'll let Patti talk about, which one would you like to talk about first, Patti?
I'll talk about it because this is a good chance for me to introduce a tool that we've been using called the FACT Competency Self-Assessment Tool. So 16 items, but if you can kind of tick those off over the course of the upcoming webinar series, you've got the basics. And from there, you can start to get creative. So the first section of this competency is really what Kirk is talking about in terms of the structural. So how in the heck do you kind of change the structure? And I think that's something that everybody goes, but this is the way we do it. This is the way we've always done it. And then you think about, how does it work? Well, there's problems with it. So it's a time to experiment with structure. Particularly now in the world where rates of suffering, psychological suffering, and illness, physiological, medical illness are growing, and our availability of people to help is shrinking a bit, and we're having trouble recruiting people. So it is a time to shake it up and see what's possible in terms of new structures. So the first structural component that I think is real important to FACT and to the results we see with FACT is making ourselves accessible. So people don't have to call, get on the waiting list, wait 2 months. That selects for a certain group of people. And it is a system that doesn't see probably about 80%, 85% of the people that we could help, that if we gave FACT to them, their lives would get better. Not only would their lives get better, but we would be making better use of the healthcare dollar, thinking of both medical and psychological expenses associated with health problems. So Kirk and I make ourselves accessible by working in primary care, but we're accessible in other settings too. So emergency room departments, certainly inpatient settings, medical, mental health, substance abuse. We're accessible. We're there because they're there. So highly accessible settings are already there and kind of positioned to open the door and see people when they put their hand up. When we do this, it shows so much respect, and I think instantly forms a relationship and takes advantage, leverages the distress the person is feeling at that moment, and promotes change right then, right there. So to be highly accessible, we have to think about, how much time do I really need to help somebody? And our assumption is that we could probably help somebody in 10 or 15 minutes. We like to have 30 minutes, but we need about 15 minutes. 30 minutes is really great. And if we need more time, we take more time. So it's not about number of visits or length so much, but it's about what do we get done? And when we're done, do we stop and open the door so somebody else can come in? So that's kind of structurally what we're trying to do. The other thing that I think is important, and something, if you take the webinar, or you study FACT in some other way, you can experiment with, is a metrics-based practice. So we have 3 rating scale measures we use in our visits with people at every visit. So we're looking at trying to get a read on the level of distress about the problem they're concerned about. And we're looking at behavioral variation, kind of obtained in one way through a behavioral experiment that follows the visit with us. In other words, taking something, going out in the world and trying to do something they've not done before in that way and show up and see what happens. So confidence in doing that is important. And then overall helpfulness. So it shows respect to ask people how we did as helpers, because people do make themselves vulnerable when they come to us and say help, and they take a chance on us. So that's the key structural elements of, I think, what makes FACT so powerful. And Kirk, you want to talk about functionally what we're trying to do in the visit, and some of the tools that we use, like the bullseye and the Foursquare and the contextual interview. Yeah.
So FACT actually stands for get the client to focus on the unworkable results of emotional and behavioral avoidance. So a general problem that human beings have is they are avoidance engines. And the way they avoid things is they avoid things through emotional suppression, distraction, turning away from their own experience. And they also avoid things in life outside the skin, right? So when people come in, basically in ACT and FACT, the assumption is that they're engaging in unworkable patterns of avoidance, many of which are taught by the culture, and then are done in the belief that if you can get rid of things that you don't like inside and outside, that will restore health. So health is kind of the absence of distressing inner experiences. And it turns out that that's actually impossible to do. So the reason we have such a runaway train of mental disorders and addictions is that people have been trained in mass, at least in the United States, via TV, social media, everywhere you look, that if you don't like something that's going on inside, take a pill to get rid of it, or do anything in your power to turn it off. And that's how you get healthy. So the A should be no surprise in the FACT sequence is, instead of avoiding, eliminating, suppressing your experience, suppressing the way you feel or what you're remembering, we want you to accept it. And all acceptance means is you don't have to like it. It doesn't mean you're admitting defeat. It just means that you understand that this is not something that I can actually voluntarily remove from my awareness. So I have to get cozy with it. I have to kind of lean up against it. The C part is, well, now that we're not going to base our life in avoidance and running from stuff and scurrying around chasing our tail, what are we going to base our life in? And what we're going to base our life in is your values. What do you believe in? Who and what matters to you? You know, what principles do you want to embody in your behavior as you enter into these difficult and challenging life situations you're in? And the T then says, now that we know what your values are, let's organize some kind of behavior that you're going to try that is different. So we're going to take some kind of action that tells you that you're approaching the situation that is causing you emotional anguish in some different way. And ordinarily, that different way is going to be a way that's consistent with your values rather than a way of responding that's based in avoidance, running from, trying to mitigate damage inside. So closely aligned with those four operations in every session basically is the same. What are you doing? How's it working? Have you thought about acceptance as an alternative to avoidance and struggle? What are your values for in this situation? What are you aspiring to be like? What would you like to see in a life where you could live the way you wanted to live? And then what actions can you take that will propel you in that direction? That's running side by side is sort of this psychological flexibility idea, which is we promote those last three letters, ACT, by generating an openness to inner experience. So we call this open. We call these the pillars of fact and act. Openness to inner experience is sort of awareness of your social training and the fact that your mind will tell you to do things that just don't work because you've been trained to have those kinds of thoughts, those kinds of rules inside. And so the ability to simply let them be there without necessarily touching them or responding to them, or what we would call being non-reactive, allows your mind to do what your mind does without it controlling your behavior. The biggest problem with a mind isn't what it's doing, it's when it is allowed to dictate your behavior in the world. That's when it becomes very problematic. Awareness, the A pillar, is basically get off autopilot, stop running around doing 90% of your living without any awareness of your intentions or what you're doing. And this is where there's a heavy component of mindfulness, various kinds of mindfulness, metaphors, experiential exercises, just getting people to show up in the moment in therapy. Just asking somebody, what's going on inside right now? As we talk about this, I notice your face just changed a little bit. Slowing it down so that people can kind of come into contact with their own perspective, right? Sort of in the middle of mindfulness is this ability to step out of the world of mind, right? It should actually be called mindlessness. I've always joked with people, we're way too damn mindful already. I don't know why we need more mindfulness training. We need mindlessness training. You need to be able to step away from that puppy when it's not helping. Take perspective on your own stories, your own narratives, kind of, the way that people get attached to their mental models makes it impossible for them to come up with novel solutions, right? So we're in the job of sort of helping people come up with novel solutions, things that your mind isn't telling you to do. But if you tried it, you might be surprised at the results. And that third pillar is kind of the output of this, what we call engaged, right? Which is go out in the world now and lay down some behaviors that reflect you choosing what you want to be about here, not doing what your mind is telling you to do. Because your mind will always tell you to run and hide because it's a damage control instrument. It is not a seeker of high-level aspirations. That's what the human is the seeker of high-level aspirations. Minds are just self-protection systems. Anyway, hopefully you can see anybody with any kind of problem. It could be a diabetic that having an A1C of 9, and is the reason they do have an A1C of 9 is because when they take their blood glucose reading, it makes them anxious because they start imagining getting an amputation, right? And so the best way not to have that experience inside is just don't take your blood sugar. And people do things like this all the time in ordinary everyday existence. So it isn't like us therapists have cleansed ourselves of avoidance behaviors. Ain't gonna happen. Everybody does it, right? And so the other thing about fact, I think, and act is very similar, is this horizontal feeling. There isn't a therapist telling a client what to do because the therapist knows how to live life and the client doesn't. It's sort of like we're in this stew together. We both are prone to avoidance. We both get suckered into things that don't work. And so there isn't any reason to talk about psychopathology here or to talk about illness or anything like that. This is just trying to get from the beginning of the race of your life to the end and being able to look back when you get to the end and saying, you know, I think I did a pretty good job of growing as a human being, of becoming the person I think I could become. I think philosophically, there's another key thing, you know, that it's sort of a structure and function thing, but we don't make any assumption that anybody we see, no matter how long they have been suffering, no matter how chronic their problems, we believe that they're a candidate for radical change. They have to show me they can't do it before I believe it. So I never look at a person's prior file and say, oh man, this is going to take forever. This person has borderline personality, you know, all these things that therapists do in response to trying to figure out what is needed here, right? The honest to God truth is we don't have enough evidence in the mental health field to say with any degree of certainty who is going to need long-term therapy and who isn't. And by the way, the idea is what's the end of this, right? What outcome are you actually talking about? Even that is confusing when you start looking at the literature. Are we talking about just getting rid of symptoms? Are we talking about being able to function in your life, some combination? Or are we talking about being able to function in your life even though you have a ton of symptoms? Try that one on for size.
So probably more questions, huh? I think we got kind of a picture of the functional aspects of intervening. It's really helping people live their best lives and function in their various roles, whatever those roles are. And we really look at their strengths and work with those. And we're always promoting behavioral variability, that group of skills involved in going out and doing something in your life because you chose it with awareness and showing up to see what happens. Michael, back to you.
Well, no, I find this very interesting. And I wonder if you could give a case example that you think a good example of how fact works. So we could, someone who's come into your office in the last while, or one that really shows fact in action, what it looks like in a session. If I was watching it, from above, what I would be seeing. Who is this person? What did they come in for? And what did you do? Tough question, maybe, but
I'll just give a really short one. Somebody I was working with yesterday in the context of training someone to be a fact provider. And it was a person, and I'll change some facts so it's not at all the same, but it was a woman that had been married for years and that had adult children that all had, adult children have problems, just like little kids have problems. But her main problem, and this was the second time coming in asking for help, was her relationship with her long-term partner. And she was very distressed about that, and had been in the first visit, and was again, and was tearful throughout the visit, and was telling a story about being ineffective as a mother, and underpowered as a life partner, and being unable to take any action. So you hear this and you're like, that's a lot going on. And one of the children had schizophrenia too. So, I mean, it was really, really, really tough. So, what we did was, in learning about her life, we looked at her strengths as well as her primary concern at the moment, and the feelings that she had of anger and fear. And we looked at her thoughts about being powerless, and we looked at what she did that was restorative, that she enjoyed. She loved classical music. She loved drawing. She had been effective with her children in various ways, and all of this came out pretty quickly. She'd really done things that really showed love and strength and the ability to organize herself. So that was just part of what we call the contextual interview, which kind of pulls these things out for people to look at in their whole life, and as it is at that moment. And then a little bit more letting her choose. We try to always give a person a choice of what makes sense for you to go out and try to do to make things better in your life. It's obviously you're not going to get rid of these problems. They're big problems. It's going to take a while to address them. But something that would tell you, I am being the kind of person I want to be, and I'm doing something different, and it's making a difference in my life, the way it's playing out. And so we talked to her about, some self-care activities, setting up a space for her, where she was away from the chaos at home, predictably could just kind of ball up in a little nest of goodness and care for herself. And we also talked about going out in the world and doing things that she didn't think she could do, that she just couldn't pull it off. She wouldn't know how to do it. And that actually, she had said that she was looking at, I had talked with an attorney about a separation agreement, but she said, oh, I can't do that. I can't do that. But that's what I need to do. And that was when she stopped crying, and we're always paying attention to how psychological flexibility is playing out in the moment. And we could see it changing as we were talking. And that's when she looked stronger. We suggested that her anger, she said, I've got to get rid of my anger first. And we're like, no, use your anger. Use your anger. Think of it as energy. And that's how we got on that she could go forward with getting the information about this separation agreement. And she left with embracing that idea as an imaginal exercise. And she was confident about that. She can get in her little ball of goodness and think about doing that, and check back in when she was ready for something new. This is the thing Kirk talks about, an average of 2 in a 6-month period with any individual person. But fact is about doing what's indicated with the person. So sometimes we might see somebody the next day if there's risk. We see somebody that is really struggling. We may call them intermittently throughout the week, several weeks in a row. Someone struggling with diabetes, we might see several times and call 3 or 4 or 5 times in several months to get some momentum. So you might think of FACT really as not brief therapy per se, or short-term therapy for sure, because this is the ultimate long-term therapy as we practice it in primary care, where we're available at that moment when things hurt to help that person grow their psychological flexibility and improve their quality of life. But they don't need to come back and until all the problems are solved. They come back when they're ready to learn something new. They need a new skill, they need a new idea, and they go out and they try things. So change is happening in their life as they need it. So it's brief, intermittent care throughout the lifespan. That's the way
I'm impressed that every session has, one of your focuses, every session has a behavioral change goal at the end of the session. No one's going to go away, well, I had a good talk, she was a nice person. You're going to be looking for with them what that behavioral change is.
Yeah, we talk about that in the way we introduce ourselves. We say, we're going to focus on the problem of concern to you today, put our heads together and come up with a plan to make a difference, try to make it better. People are like, huh, and we also say sometimes people come back, check on their plan, improve it or extend it, learn new skills, and sometimes they don't, because things get better. We'll see how it goes with you. We will, of course, schedule follow-up if that's the person's choice. Or we'll also say, just come on the call early in the morning on the day you want to come back. They might not know if they want to come in a week or 2 weeks.
Well, I have lots more questions, but so do other people. So what I'd like to do, there's a few in the chat line. And at this point, if you'd like to put something in chat box that says you'd like to come on the screen, or raise your hand using the raising your hand function, let's go. So Emily.
So there was just a
Over to
couple
you.
of follow-ups. There was a couple of follow-ups to Patty's last case, the case scenario you just gave. And how long was that session between you and that client?
It was about 36 minutes.
And did you end up seeing that client again?
That client scheduled to return. She'll be back.
Those were the follow-ups for right now.
Yeah.
And if you are looking to raise your virtual hand, it's under the React button at the bottom, and you can raise your hand if you have any questions.
Well, maybe what people think of questions, there was a PowerPoint, I believe, that was sent, Kirk, with some of your principles.
Yeah, let me just get that up.
This slide is about the course that we're going to be teaching. Do you want to talk about that right now?
Sure, a little bit about that, and what it looks like.
We have a little different approach to training, I think, than most people do. There's a lot of evidence that one-off workshops change people's attitudes, but they don't really change their clinical skills. So we've organized courses now that the focus is on incrementally adding clinical tools to your practice. And by incrementally, it means you're not going to get all of it all at once. You're going to get it in doses. And then in between doses, you're going to have a chance to try stuff out in your practice for about a month. And then when you come back, we actually start by talking about any things that's happened. What did you try? Did you run into any issues? And what we found is that allows people to actually start to acquire skills. The way we build this course is we start off with the basic stuff. That's in October. Each of these sessions is 2 days, a total of 7 hours of education. The basic stuff is kind of what we were talking about before today at the lunch. But it also goes into more detail about things like the contextual interviewing framework, how to introduce yourself to clients. We have to actually have people practice their introduction and polish it so that it encourages rapid change, and it kind of encourages a certain brisker pace in the exchange. Patti mentioned, giving people options. Well, how do you frame options to people, right? What's a way to frame options that will get people to buy into the option that they pick? Teaching about the rating scales, how do you protect against overprescribing change?
Also, just assessment of psychological flexibility. How can you go through the contextual interview and at the same time be looking at how psychologically flexible that person is at that moment in time? So a lot of the things that we do in that first weekend are carried through into the next 2 weekends of work. Are they weekends or weekdays?
I don't know.
It's a Friday and Saturday.
It's a Friday and Saturday. Yeah. And what are the hours, Emily?
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
I will share a link in the chat so that everyone can go to the website and see the details. I think it's 4.5 hours on Friday and
Yeah.
2.5 hours on the Saturday.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit longer, so we get some breaks in there so everyone can continue to be fresh for their learning. But I will put the details in the chat shortly.
Thank you. And the thing is, we try to make it really skill focused. So we have you work with a learning partner, and if you decide to sign up, you might want to sign up with somebody that you work well with, or as part of the team that you work with, so that you have somebody to practice with that and that can also be somebody you can check in with between the various workshops in October, November, and December. Once we get, kind of assessment and conceptualization and some theory under our belts in October, then we're off into interventions. And in November, we have a little tool called the Pillars Intervention Guide. We call it the PIG. And so dancing, doing the pig, so to speak, so that you can kind of look at where am I now and where's the opportunity for assisting that person with growing their skills for behaving in more flexible ways right now in this clinical conversation. And how can we take those and package them into an experiment in the world where they can grow them in an applied sense and in the context of their lives. We also do a lot of fun things, working in the present moment, do a little exercise, therapist downers, things that are that people we're serving can say that just make our hearts sink and make us want to think about lunch or getting outside or how many more minutes we have and how to care for ourselves in those moments and respond in a more present oriented and powerful way in terms of promoting change. And then the last December, gosh, it'll be here. We're gonna do some of our favorite metaphorical kinds of interventions that even if you're new, they invite you to doing interventions that focus on opening, awareness, engaging, and to move around, like we were talking about in that November webinar, to move around with confidence, but with the support of the metaphor. We'll also talk about groups and classes, and particularly about the life path class, which is something that has been used in various contexts, has been used by the Veterans Administration of the United States for people waiting for therapy, and demonstrated to have value. It's been used in Norway. I've been working with people there that have used it in rehabilitation medicine for people that are out of the, out of the river of life and not connected with their community through work or ways of being of use and plugged in. Really fun kinds of work there. I've used it myself in cardio and pulmonary rehab. Other people have used it with children, adolescents. I think it's some people have used it with parents, particularly parents of children that require more medical services, because they benefit from more psychological flexibility because life is stressful in that context of walking beside and leading and supporting a child that is growing up in a world that's not exactly set up to care for their needs. So we'll talk about that. And then in the Netherlands, there's a group of people that are actually delivering it within their communities to just enhance psychological flexibility at the community level. And we'll talk about evidence for these different kinds of uses and different kinds of formats as we go through. But overall, the course will be very interactive and applied in the sense that you'll be invited in to practice and learn. Now, we do realize that some people learn better from observing, so we tend to set up our learning groups with 3 or 4 so that there's the opportunity to learn from observing, and so that you can stay with a group if you so like. Even if somebody's absent, you still, for part of a webinar, has to leave early. So we've been doing this for a while. We've been learning from people, and we really see every time we do these things as an opportunity to be in the moment, work with a group that formed, and learn from that group and make changes as we go along and bring in things that really interest you. So it's kind of a dynamic class.
Well, thank you for that overview. And we have a really good question from Sylvie. Thank you for this. Could you please speak about how FACT works with people with a PTSD diagnosis?
Yeah, well, I think positioned in primary care, we see a lot of people with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I think it's a real statement about how things are in the world, that the prevalence is so high. So we identify people with, in fact, we're often the first people after a trauma. So we just see people with stress after a traumatic event and have the opportunity to prevent a full-blown kind of disorder that has impacted many areas of the person's life over time. So we say yes, and we try to help in the moment, whether it's more on the prevention side or on the chronic side. We look with a person's look at their psychological flexibility. We often start with values, what they want to do in the world and what's most important to them, and try to better connect them with that experience or that memory of being that person at some point in their life. and to experience it really as a physical memory in the body of being who they want to be. And in that way, make the body a more safe place for them to be, and a bigger place for them to be, and big enough to hold the traumatic memories that are often in the body and triggered in small ways by small things that are outside their awareness. And we'd also be working on just awareness and in being able to find that present moment, feet on the ground, hands together, hands holding each other, and be in that present moment and find connection with that sense of safety and that's present for them at the moment. So work on awareness and values, and then opening. Sometimes our opening to traumatic memories and experiences. The big problem with treating PTSD, if we start there, we insist on that, is we tend to lose people because it's hard to open in a way that feels safe and useful. And that's why even some of our more powerful treatments are not used by much because people don't tolerate them, so they don't come back. So I think we may go into opening to memories over time. But a lot of times we just give the person a chance to weigh in on that. And a lot of times they say, no, I don't need to do that. What I need is to function better. And so we work on that functioning, and it's that letting the person be in charge of what they're ready for and when they're ready for. We do have studies, the US military, of just using a variety of interventions, not just FACT, but a variety of interventions, CBT, and there are overlaps in this primary care setting. And what they find is that in 4 30-minute sessions, many people no longer meet criteria for PTSD. They may still have symptoms, and their symptoms that they work with. Other people, and this is the really important thing, other people who still need more intensive help are more willing to engage in a more intensive treatment than if they had not, than those that did not have the benefit of the experience of, opening and experimenting in primary care in these small doses first. So I think we can grow the confidence of higher severity. That being said, I just want to say the data say people with higher severity do improve in these types of interventions, 30 minutes, same day. So we have to kind of question our assumptions and look at the research and see who did they study and where did they receive care and what were the comorbidities. Because a lot of times we don't know some of the things that we need to know. So yeah, I think we can help a lot with PTSD in primary care. I wouldn't back away from it. I think modeling openness to it, modeling compassion. I think more and more I see shame as a component of traumatic experience, and in that inability to kind of work with that shame memory and access greater compassion results in more chronicity, whatever the diagnosis, PTSD or something different. I don't know. I kind of went in different directions, but hopefully did give some useful information. A person with that question, yes. Follow-up question or
There's actually a recent study that showed that psychological flexibility mediates the relationship between post-traumatic stress disorder and substance abuse. So PTSD doesn't cause substance abuse. The lack of psychological flexibility when you have PTSD, right? Because lack of flexibility means you're oriented around avoidance. That predicts falling into drug use and alcohol use. So, this general model is directly on point with respect to recovery from trauma. And I love working with trauma type situations because it's the perfect storm of social training. You keep having symptoms that you don't want to have, you can't get rid of them. Other people don't seem to have these symptoms. People that are normal don't have what I have. You fall into just one trap after another, and they all point you in the wrong direction. They point you away from living. And so you end up sacrificing the things that you most aspire to in your life. This is not meant to be cold-hearted at all. I think we're very compassionate. But at the end of the day, life doesn't care what happened. What life cares about is what's going to happen next. What are you going to do now? Right? What you're going to do now is relive what's happened to you and organize your behavior around that. You just get the results that you get. And they aren't going to be things that you want to have happen. So it's that ability to you have to carry your history with you. It's not being cold-hearted about what happened or, it's terrible, it's horrible. And in a sense, you have to take that along for the ride.
the life path is a great intervention for that too. So I hope we see some of you again. We're just about at time. So I'll hand it back to Michael to
Well, you're right.
Yeah.
We're just about out of time, and sorry we didn't get to all the questions. I know there are a few more, but thank you very much. I think this is it's not new, but to me, it's still a revolutionary approach that really looks at helping people change in ways that sometimes other therapies don't do as effectively, I don't think. So thank you very much for being here, and for everyone else who's come. Really appreciate seeing some names and faces from our leading edge past and some new names and faces that are hopefully are part of our future. Emily, thank you very much, and thank everyone for being here, and have a great day wherever you are.